Geshe Thabkhe, Tachidale.
Good, yeah, welcome.
Sakadawa. And good morning, Katrina. Thank you for your translation. I'd like to say something to Geshe.
Yeah,
Geshe, we'd like you to share in our joy. We've spent 4 days reciting the Prajnaparamita in 8,000 lines, and we dedicate this as our practice to you and for your good health and long life. Please rejoice.
Genla.
yeah,
Konso ki chik shuya yores. Ta
yeah,
nima shi ki ringla konso ge tongba inchi ki tola tun yores.
and
Ani gewa di konso kirangi tse ringbo la ngoya yores. Ani sangye ki temba taryadan gewa di la ngogi yores.
condenser, Yabuchilla.
Yeah.
Conto get on by engine at your reserve.
tumbares. Kandun tun yores. Nima shi...
And
Yeah. 아니 게와디 타치당 상게기 템바 게발라 ngogiores yang kerangi tsering shuala ngogiores getadi
Also,
yeah,
Gena did because they gave a year away because Suna Mambo Saso. No, she get ring like concert dumper done a day or day. Then they digi sunam Gena could say ring were
yeah.
your shows.
So we have a few extra people here.
Oh, yeah, what's there?
That's very good, thank you. Yes.
So we have a few extra people here with us this morning
Oh, dear.
for the class.
That's it.
Mi tepa kashe yores mi mangbo yore di ge tongba tumbala yongbarwa.
Oh, dear. Oh, yeah.
And so we'll begin with some prayers. You'll find the link for that in the chat box.
To the teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, oneness God, full destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one God of bliss, nor the world supreme guide of beings to be tamed. Teacher of gods and humans to you, the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. When I was supreme among the humans, you were born on this earth, you faced seven strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you, more wise than I bow, with your body's form supremely fine, wisdom motion like a golden mountain, fame the places in the three worlds, winner the best, supreme guide, to you I bow, with the supreme sign, face like a spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the three worlds are not incomparable, wise one, to you I bow. Great, compassionate, protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, to the Tathagata I vow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms. Unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma lives peace I bow. Having freedom of self, showing the path to freedom too, well established in the trainings. The holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, mirage, a flame, a little lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble. A dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all seeing, subdue the four faults, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence, perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, foreland, sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you. May all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Guru Namanalakam Niryatayami. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
뭐야, 되셔라.
딕성.
뭐야. 다들 거시. 다 준주래 세션다. 대한 준주래 계속 붙이와래 손래로. 되네. 미 줄라 때네네. 동해 추우칠래주. 준디 친내 니가 왜 몸버티 순이 말로스. 시송 받아서. 나라저 단도 밀리톱 되베로. 아니 녀송그 동해를 저시게. 당 녀송그 동해다 코에 동해도 겸존나 싶어. 땡사부로와 탐해봐. 된리얼바 빼찬 송거라. 땡가라저 다른 톱에 밀리디 주진다보지. 주진다보. 녀와이다 전주를 깨대도 주진이와 말와. 그게 제가 말 삼로 코트예요 말에. 로 전주를 실게이나 코에 동해다 녀송 동해를 타래 탑시에 삼로 코트 말와. 뒤에 가서라. 미 줄라 때네네 소소 밀리란데 밀리디 녀송당 코에 동해를 저시기 주다부래 송거라. 주신다케요 말에.现在被江南教育教育了，本来错起不习不习，讲做起不习不习不习，今天把主要的了，最近嘛都主身的用的没有些，是吧？老了不就那样，老开始那进嘛的，但说是反正个人呢，十岁就带的嘛都你估计带嘛是吧？你估计带那住的小那的小菜了，他怕他个嘛是吧？真的是是个啦，他那个人是没有头的个的。코어당 예송 그 동일의 주식이 주진다부래 주다부래 서라 미 줄라 때문에 동네 추우칠래 주스 예송이 동네 추우침보 땡다 탐해봐 대들 주식이 타와 뒤 저도 그래 코에 동네 땡다 탐해봐라 들려 했잖아 아니 밀린 뒤에 때문에 주진다부시네 저도 그래 서라 미 줄라 때문에 동네 추우칠래 주스 준디 친내 니가 몸바도스 니말로스 밀륜 데르치 코에 동네에 다르게 주단 저 밀륜 데르치 치수 니가 오르다 송거라 준디 친내 니스가 마음바나 진짜 토에 가버려 다른 거라 답르지 레네 교나마데 갈래 짬네 다른 야부시 토버라 너 토바데 동네 초글이야 저게 탑란 줘 아치 오르마도 밀리 토바데 동네 초글 마드야 탑시 주르잖아 아니 내가 좀 보시라라 정원에 미개벨레라 맞은 버세 아니 템퍼처 보여라 밀리 계산 돈도다 되고 말아 돈도에 시다 코티고 좀 사야게요 말아 개와사야면 티고 좀 보는데 첩좀 사야시요 말아 당가라서 밀게네 때고 뺄랍신 부사야 되와 미 마불 사와시야 요래 심제 마불 사와시야 삼바 마rum바 마부 거리요래 때고 뺄랍신 부사야 되와 어디에도 미 코에 동엘에 타지게 주다부디 샤네네 야야마 조야게 잠주 땡레 마 조야게 또네 시지 소소 소울 또다나 시지 마 조셔가 스르 chen 마디사 준디 치네 니에가 몽바세 국바다 국방원에라 또다 춘주든데 나르스는 가지고 국바레세라 미티 국바사제 국방원에도 또다 춘주 나나 시라 국바케 말아 시라 할래요 말아 다단데 등원에 국바 생이 상에 국바들아 다 삼로다 마신게 지는 가요 말아 삼로다 신게 와래 삼로 통통게 와래 소소 삼로다는 다요 요라 어디인데 대sabsoche 우리 송다 미 줄라 때네 네 동에 쇼실래 줘 준디 치네 니거왜 몽바 두수 니말로 주디 토베 두수 니말로 sabsoche 티날 자지제 대송거라 어야 디베쇼체 우리 송거라 뭐 디칠라나야
So here, as the great master Shantideva has said in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, this life of leisure that we have right now is like a great vessel or a great boat by which we are able to cross this ocean of suffering. And so here, as this is something difficult to find again, you fool, this is not time for sleep. So here, the kind of body that we have right now, the kind of life that we have right now is something that we can use to cross this ocean of suffering, the sufferings of the lower realms, avoiding being born as, say, an animal or in those kinds of circumstances as well. We have the ability to cross the ocean of all of samsara's sufferings. So here, if we were to be born in a situation where we're like an animal, for example, we don't have the ability to actually cross this ocean of suffering. So in the same way that if you needed to make a crossing over a great ocean, you would need to have the proper kind of a vessel to be able to make that journey of however long it might take, months or years. We shouldn't sort of take for granted the life that we have right now, but rather use it for a good purpose, right? To cross this kind of ocean of suffering. We have the ability to avoid a rebirth in the lower realms, experiencing the kinds of sufferings of animals or hungry ghosts or hell beings. And we have the ability, if we use this properly, to cross the ocean of all of samsara's suffering. And so here, this is something that we should, again, like if you have the proper vessel and are able to thereby transit from one place to a far distant location, we should use what we have, recognizing that this is something that is quite difficult to find in the future. It's not as though this is something that we can take for granted. We have in the past created the kind of causes that led us to take such a rebirth. It isn't like a rebirth as an animal, wherein you don't have the ability to think and understand. And even as an animal, although you don't necessarily incur great non-virtues, you're also not able to put much effort into virtuous actions. But the life that we have right now, the kind of situation as a human being, we have the ability both for great good as well as great bad. We see that there are those that are very malicious and violent toward others, the way that we can think improperly about others. We have the capacity to actually incur a great deal of non-virtue, but we also have the ability to do the kind of work that will help us to transgress or to cross this ocean of great suffering. And so here it's really, it says like sort of, you fool, you stupid one. I mean, we call people stupid when they make small mistakes, but wasting this life is not really a small mistake. This is a case where, yes, it really is stupid if you don't sort of wake up and use the situation that you have in order to make the kind of preparations for the future, ensuring that at the very least you gain another rebirth like this in the future. We have all of the kind of conditions, right? We have the ability to think and reflect and act in accordance with the Dharma. And so we should be careful. As it says again, this kind of life that we have right now is like a boat by which we are able to cross this vast ocean of suffering. But this is something that is difficult to find again in the future. So you fool, this is not the time for sleep. As in, be careful. Use what you have right now in order to make preparations for the future, in order to benefit yourself.
Oh yeah, the Kasura. Whereas the church said, Nambana Shichendra, Joangama Susu, Ludi Chebutavore, Sim de ko Lule Tende Yutako, Samsal Sim Sebo, Tumbu, Yabu, Lando Hakongi, Samsal Lutu Sacha Tundri Lures in Lansona, and the Sim Sebo Malando in the Machingis Duera. The end ko Lude Chebutavore, Kitchi in Yukiora. Jurwa Chambuchi or Lugi and Yuki Semi Yuki. Oh, Tina Karsora. Joangamane Sem Juk Toma Mebane Lenda Medrasani, John Damadalani Deguara. Oh, Mountbana Tanda to Snatch Devina, John Damadalani Resetora. Oh, Tina Karsora. Joangama Ya Sasha Bele Tindrigi. Nimangima Sasha Bele, Give Basset of the Samsamlia. Ani dental hatan miliki kukabrayora. Mang chawate namji ma ngesong le kia mato yomara. Ngendu kia da kasi shema gora mambu yoyora. Ngara zo dental le kia dengi so ma ngesong le kia de pe sachi bitu na shi shara. Mang chawa ma doke dosha yora. Ya kyalo cheche. No. Ta ngendu ne ya milu lan towe de. Sanjay Samuel Kalia, two Shassing Samuel Shebe, two double Shebe, New Shebe, Sangora, Chidang Yason, the Yayon at the New Madu get a begora, or the Taripe Subso Chikore at Tandarua, me to let in it, Tatare Yardre cook of the Rasora, the Madre cook of the Tassos, said the Matachig, Yardona cook of the Ordo, me Lulatene. Gewatu me shanla tsawapa. Che said Chimando said the Ranambachene. Namada Chimanina Chimando said the Abush Sugara. Majuti Pechana Guda. Jig said the Chiwala Jig said Namba Chubachina. She saw it on Rosettle Shigara. Young Kawachi Langore, the Kawa to Bulana Penyanga some. Teleshene Kawa Sambuch Language some Giora. She con share che homa coi chinira. Tele keva de tore ser keva bello mambu ke dunga nyangura. Chiwa de shuda yeru muke amar tondu chile ta kalere che uche maje che tosti armado. Shuda ke mare sera. O tij de kashe che samlo mange je. Ta mebe cha do go sam shige ora. Bakche ginji basira. Na mebe cha do go sa mebe cha go mare. Mebe cha na ne tike omara kasere. Gangbi Bagashana Shida, Kakio Maris, Dressa Kakio Maris, Mavishando Sena Shida. No one down but tree some lunar Karisha, some Mavisha Maradasigoda. Mavishana Chagio Marani, you shot a Pesichidi, Untikida Koshira Hale Gemedo. No, Tiri Casa. Oh, the Yando said the Mando singing a catch, shooting a razor. Me lyrics land, high lyrics land, and ya gone content drone, and they go among us only Tarache, Koala Tarache Gura. Titondal Shushiora, she said. Oh, Titondal, you did to do any said deal happen Givara. Send Titondal Sayatoya going to Chuchio Mara. Georgima the Yabu Tondal Chuchiora. The Yabu Chevy and Michelle swap up and to Samba Sambu Chevy. So the Sendele give riches all of him, but I show all of that. Negab finger the Dasura. Pusu Namis number member Geshe de Maumba long at the race. Titan Churchiora. No thing. Joachima Yang is only my Romuguase. Sada me, Jawa Church to be 10 Kebarishan Panjatom the Yar, some Lushu Shimbutana, Sanjay Kovan button dress, some Tango Tangureda. Tarba Toyatera, Yasungutung at the Pata Chasing, Tentunet Tentu. Roa, and if Tialia Koya Dungele Taya Samlo, Tanda Samlo Tani, Tinu Cherita. There's a mind by Simja Tamja say Samlo Jakenepa, Nindu Chibuya Tanjani, Simja Tamja Pantba to Tungege. Gilco say you they could degi, Consassin Guajaku with some Samlo Koyora, or Titan that Chosiora. Did you love me?
So here, when we talk about doing the Dharma, when we think about it, our body and our mind are constantly changing, right? We take up different bodies that act as the support of this mind, but there is a continuity to the mind, right? We go, it's changing moment to moment. Our body is also constantly changing moment to moment, but that mind will take up different bodies based upon the kinds of actions that we have committed in the past. And so here, the kind of actions that we have committed lead us to take a particular birth. And sometimes we have committed enough virtuous actions. We have these sorts of virtuous imprints that we then are able to do the Dharma, really do something positive within, say, a human life. We can work toward gaining a good rebirth again in the future, or striving for liberation or beyond that. But when we look at the number of beings that go from sort of miserable states of existence to miserable states of existence, those bad rebirths, that is quite prevalent. Most beings, we don't even need to really talk about that. It's like the number of particles that there are on the earth. Whereas those that go from a bad rebirth into a good rebirth are almost like the number of particles underneath a fingernail. So it's extremely difficult for us to go from that kind of state of a lower existence into some better kind of state. And so we need to recognize the sort of opportunity that we have. The opportunity to go downward is always there, but it's really something where we need to take advantage of the future, of the situation that we have in terms of ensuring that we have a good future, gaining another rebirth as a human or a god. And so we need to make sure that where we go in the future is good. When we talk about sort of the fear of death, in Buddhism, it's not just about that act of dying. That's a natural kind of a thing, and it's actually quite short. But rather, it is a fear of where will we go in the future? What kind of rebirth will we take based upon the actions that we have done? And so when we talk about having a fear of death, it's really what comes after death, because again, the process of dying is something that is quite natural. And it's not really, when we think about the sort of suffering, aging involves much more suffering and torment, right? That goes over a long period of time, and we have to experience all kinds of different suffering. Whereas when it comes to being afraid of death, in a Buddhist context, that's thinking about, well, where am I going to be reborn in the future? Have I ensured that I'm going to get a good rebirth? Now, some people might fear death out of a kind of nihilistic view that they are going to become non-existent after they die. It's sort of like the view of the hedonists, wherein once you die, you're nothing, and there's therefore you should just sort of do whatever. But it's not the case that we will become non-existent, right? There is a continuity to our mind. We are going to continue going up and down and so forth based upon the kind of actions that we have committed. So if we are to engage in abandoning the 10 non-virtues, making an effort toward virtuous actions, we can ensure that we gain a good rebirth again in the future. And so we don't do the Dharma really for the affairs of this life, to be able to have food and clothing and reputation and so forth, but those are kind of temporary benefits that come from doing the Dharma. We will have those sorts of positive effects that come from doing the Dharma, but the real ripening results are coming in our future lives. So the most important thing that we can do is be thinking about that future and ensuring that we are able to have a good rebirth as a human or a god in order to continue to pursue higher goals, and in order to continue to increase our desire for liberation and the kind of efforts that we are making towards that, or even beyond that, increase the mind of thinking about other sentient beings, striving for a state of Buddhahood in which you have eliminated all faults and developed all good qualities and have the ability to fully benefit other sentient beings. And so really here we need to think about what we are doing now, because of the future is dependent upon the kind of actions that we engage in at the present. And really our thinking about death is thinking about, well, what will come after, and what am I doing in order to make preparations such that I can ensure at the very least I have a good rebirth and am able to continue striving for those goals of liberation and the state of Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. The Dharma is about the future, even though it brings good results in the present as well.
Oh yeah. Oh, the indigo chute so do shana. Ni shala choa pamba da pemba truba ni na do so gudwa. Ti mo ne tande re te ora. Chamba da se ona do ra. 这个是都想了那个没些什么，东西出来，东西从那这个嘛的什么些，想了吃完饭也得用过的。想了偏白主是都想了调我的车那什么，所以呢，调我六把这是要去穷那什么，调我的车就什么都用过的。第二的时间呢，你用过的，长嘛，他的洗了长嘛，讲究生命年的，年纪全部年的，也得也，东北人过面的，没大夫过面的，这做地震的了。东北人过面的，恰当可能的，要不然没都是早可能把这真的了。恰当的往给你讲的，刚刚用不多什么。对对，这半夜听到了，东北人过面的，没大包过面的，这是刚刚用过的。这上面等于那特别的，加切了当给我了。现在吃完半夜的加切了，那不半夜的了。偏把周围的加切了当然你也确实给我了对了。我对你告诉我了，是什么呀？对你绿的啊的，吃完的绿啊，你给我那用过了。semge samlo tayde semde tore deora semge samlo ngemba kosun linga ni de karchesune te chigra keje tuja shesune tuja shesune shesune shugure ngemba karchesune linga ni de semge khorra sira ti inde ko linga ko ne shala chawa yongor ti ne tambu semde yabuji söbe yine sangbu söbe yine chamsi de dembe söbe yine linga ala juwa dodo bare deora 어디 이제 남배 최대 지단 최리한 담에다 가시 요래서 조치해야 되다. 가시 밤이 그 따설에 끊는 건 근지 그 전에 최조치해라 싫어. 갈래 잡에다 소불치 티셔야다 남주대야다 소불 갈래 때야다 직진데 조어럽시 요래서 싫어. 가셔야 나네 진더네야. 现在呢，讲究学习，自己写了慢慢写了这些，别的说嘛，对不起。개개지 근데제 쉬쉬어래 세라 조르데 가시데 셈비 사무다네 셈레 주주다네 에네 링아 주바니데 주주다에게 쉬쉬어래 세라 뒤에 남배 쳐데 뒤도 자갈이데 고철 다음에 마보여 줘라 가실 지게 템버 가실 때 템버고라 가거 찍바용 마라 가사소소서 로다 참발로 님도 시중다 시럽 시중다 진들 때는 용구라 뒤에 거 가서 nang bei chue de zo sem le ya ju ju dan de yi jie de sem le ju gao yin xie de wang bu nong bu gu da sam lu dan de dan ye de xie yo de go ga qian bu sam lu dan gu yo de lo le qu bu gu yo de dang bu sem le ju ju dan ye de wa di dan ni lu ma ni de ju ju do do de wa di de da di shan de nam ju san ji nga zu sung gu da yo ga shi de 디버치 하면서 개와 부서 소바샤스 대대 잠정이 되고도 디버치도 서와 연구하라 개와 부서 소바치도 샬펜도 조교하라 랑그 심리 용선 되세 되게 산제 때문에 산제 좀 된데 최대한 된다도 티인수라 심리 뭐 되게 뺀걸로 지라 안가 냄균이 시대가 봐 준준할 가지고 봐 이신동 됐으면 차차로세 소소 샘기 야부 제베는 소소다 창마 야부 소보다 오늘 샘데 상계 그 유세데 샘데라 샘데 야르다네 둘르네 에시페 야부 쇼지요 알아 tindu 가서라 이신동 됐으면 차차로세 소소소소 샘데 차차 가와 공겨라 두 가지 있잖아 이 두지디 송부 배세나 연구도 이신동 됐으면 차차로세 그 말을 준준할 데려 가서 semna시게 지된데는 sem례지고 생각하면서 신나 치수지서도 sem례를 송거라 신다 말에 손자다 대주 말에 대주께 말에 그 교용 말로 미심대라 감수나 sem례지고 생각하면서 준주려 저는 내가 또 배제 방문해야 돼 연구도 이신노데 sem례 차차로서 소소 셈데 이신이 너무 소소도 상마 좁중게데 셈데레 샤삼데 소소 셈레 소소 차체게라 뒤에 자가서라 다오 셈이야 조치신 남준에 소소 최게 제람 주마 주세 산제게 제람 주마 주세 로 라메 제람 주마 주세 직셰셰셰데자 셈레 도진 요한도도네 제람 주고요래 셈레 요한도면에 산제 송샤 최까지 년에 최게 제람 주고요 말에学个偏道要嘛的，等到查出来，那个要的，查的，我这到他们这个就够学了着。 머리 단지를 제일 버치야. 되지.
So, if we really summarize the Dharma, it can be summarized into these 2 points of do no harm and benefit others. This is really encompassed in compassion and love. The mind of compassion meaning may others be free from suffering, and then love being may they be endowed with happiness. And this is really the kind of foundation of all of the practices. Everything that we do in terms of thinking about love and compassion, or bodhicitta, the method side, as well as the wisdom side, studying things like emptiness and impermanence, they are all really to expand upon those 2 basic points of do no harm and benefit others. I mean, we study emptiness, we try to realize emptiness in order to get rid of our attachment and aversion from the root, the source of our harming others and being able to benefit others. So really, we take as the foundation non-harm and the wish to benefit and expand and increase them more and more. And so our harm generally to others comes more directly from the actions of our body and our speech, but those in turn are driven by our mind. And so within Buddhism, the mind is the main thing. If we make our mind good, if we make our mind kind, then our body and speech will follow after that. We see that in other traditions, there's some traditions in which there's a focus on doing like austerities of the body, things like fasting or particular kinds of bodily activities, or there are others in which really one's speech is seen as primary, like reciting certain things again and again and again. And then there are some traditions that are really about the mind and trying to improve and develop the mind. And so we see, like, for example, in India, there are many different types of religion, and they are taught in order to accord with the various dispositions and capacities of various sentient beings. But really, when we think about the kind of presentation within Buddhism, it is that the mind is principle. The actions of our body and speech will follow after the mind. And so we need to really work on improving our mind through developing and expanding non-harm and the wish to benefit. And so when we do non-virtue, we are creating harm to others. When we do virtuous actions, we are bringing about benefit. As it is said in the verse that we recite at the beginning, that do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. And really that essentializes, encompasses all of the principles of Buddhism within that simple verse, that when we do non-virtuous actions, we are creating suffering, harm for others. So we should avoid any of that. And we should do only what is beneficial. And we do this really through subduing our mind. That is the principal teaching of the Buddha. And so there are scriptures in which it is said, like, I bow to this mind of mine that is like a wish-fulfilling jewel. It's really something that is amazing, incredible. We have this capacity to be able to develop our mind such that we can benefit and avoid harming others. And so too, as Shantideva has said in his Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, there's nothing in these 3 realms as scary as our own mind, as much fear-inducing as our own mind. When we think about it, it's not like weapons or other things that we should really fear. It is the mind that creates all of those. And so it is the case that all of our desired aims are accomplished through working with our mind. And it is true as well that we create our greatest sufferings through not having control over our mind, through letting our mind sort of do whatever it wants. And so here, the mind is principle. The mind is the main thing. And it really is, when we talk about, say, like receiving the blessings of the Buddha or blessings from a teacher, if our mind is transformed, then that is really receiving those blessings. If our mind is transformed for the better, then we are able to say that we have received those blessings. And that is really where the benefit of the Dharma comes. If we listen to a lot of Dharma and it just hardens our mind, it keeps it from being transformed, then there's no benefit that comes from the Dharma. So recognizing that, again, the Buddha's teachings can be essentialized into these 2 points of non-harm and benefiting others, and that the mind is principle, that really improving, developing our mind is the main point. The Dharma is in order to do that. And we have received the blessings of the Dharma if we are able to create that kind of transformation in our mind.
Oh yeah, that in this that they call it. Because talking about 미 줄을 때는 동해 주실을 줄서와 인디 단주 다른 밀리디 토바티로 아니 겨와치마 냐와이다 돈줄라 메게 겨와 라다 미 추주베테 케버치게 돈달이야 네 가르치 오래서나 링와 예수 이권에 미기와 주파에더라 미기와 주파 텐도서 소 제데 소 교배 탑시체라 어디나시 마침발렘바 바 침바타에 소소 로바체 신다이네 파티체 어디 미게와 주디 바케와 주투베 쉐딩 아주 전에 제 토비에다 디남규께지 쉐디다 지존나 두디 강가 용구라 칸에게지 쉐디사 미게와 용도 용문도다 링아 제발 용도 용문도다 셈지 삼로리아 디는 납신 납셀 진짜 용도 용문도 따야라 디 집샤를 당기 지근에는 용도 그래 집샤마다자 하고 사고 세샤선을 고 드라게 요마라 시다 하드코 어디야고데 마도 디펜도게 요마라 집샤 당기 지고라 제가 예son 그 동에 까니 하다 밀리게 탑시딩 가지고 스탠드 제토에다가 무슨라 저 통만 매번에 사베 티벌파 겨바체 샤파체라 에첸델이야 영아 예송기 미기와 주텔에 토나 체체 티파나네 티라다 밀리게 고타 추사라 틱부디 타에 여자고 샤파체자 다루라 아니 겨와 주텔 공고 공자고 계획 삼루티 숙체를 지용구라 어때 인데니 제가 라물라 대수 삼루트서 코르시고 라다 밀리게 수수 라바이베 소리시도와 디레 다 들레 라바제 기분 등이래지나 디짱짱 지금도 삼다 사다 미 동해지랑 심망부여라 예송라 뛰어도 야부시다래 텐도래데 이내 지단 고통해시다요라 깨가나실래 소파치 내가 토도 메메도바 토도 뭐 삼망부여라 어디시에 뭐시 어디인데 대술레 타로와지 제국도 삼 대서 게 교대 가래서는 아니 데로 녀모고왕게 레사야더라 레사 공조당 아제당 차도당 대설라서 녀모 디나네 지금 현자치서데 현자치 번능아 삼성가지다 넘버시나 나 삼성 당부대 나를 현재 최소요라 소소데 라와도 시비 삼을코요라 라와도 삼을코네 소소리아 ngārzīdī shūkṣaṁbu shivichā shenjā shūkṣaṁbu yōrā. Tī yodī āni ngāi lū sērā, āni ngāi nāngmī sā, ngāi mīrī sā, ngāi chūlgu sērā, kāngā yungu yōrā. Sā kō shenjā chī sūtā gātī, shenjā mē bachā na, āni kōndu tī yungu mārwa. Shenjā chī yōsā kō kōndu yungu yōrā, chīli shenjā chī pachō tī mītīmbā chēsā, āni kōndu yungu yōrā. Tī pā mē bachā yā tāndāli yā. Shenjā, sēpa sīgirā, sēpa ndōchā, shenjā. ngōpa kāngā pēchū chē kālā sāyā kōrē, tōngyā kōrē, chī kāngā kōtē kōrē wā lū sōyā tēndā lē. Tsōwā tsamjī tēng rē mā tō chī kī tē shēbō chē pā sōsō mēndē chī shēbō tē kī shēnchā kā chī shūk chēmbō yō rā, tē kī tē kī wā mā rā. Chī tā kō yāngyī tē tē tō yōngu rā wā kō. Mē yī nām dī dī mē rī, dī dī mē ngā, dī lī pēng kī rī, dī lī pēng mā rā sē, tē tē yō rā. Tī trā chū bā tū lē yōngu wā rā. Sā kō pēne tē sām mā tō chī kī shēbō chē ngārazu samlūna tindā chōrā sindī pēnchōrā chīnā chīk shibu sā chīk pāchī tākvāra shīngyamdō kīchā dhāyabā samlū sōrā chī kōgirā tīndī kāsūrā shīnchā shūk chīmbūdī mē sō na ānē kōndu dī yōngā yōmārā shīnchā tī mē na ngā shīnchā tī lū kō ngē sāmbē tōnā shī chīk mē dū sāng pāchī dī kōndu sāyā chī yōrā dī yōng yōmārā chōndu rā chākdāngi dī nyōrī chīnī chākdāngi wāngi lēsāyā tī kiawātā mīgī lēsāyā tī mē chādurā. Tī yīndi wāni kārsūrā kua sōsōli rāwā mē bā pūmbū dōlīng chē kūpa tī lī tādu kūdwa, kīpū dīngi samlī kūdwa. Tā tī pā gyākē chī sōsō chāngyā mā rē samrā, sōsō chīpū tīndē tāyā samlī tī yāwū rē mē dū sā. Tāndā ngā sō samlī kōtō yō mā rā, chī kua tūngē kī nā chū tōma mē bā nā chī tāndā chī mā bā nā dū stēngi samlī tāpā tāngē chī nā sui me tu kura chiyo kuwa ra. Ta sosu nanshin, sosu pama ta nye nye disi, kozo samlu ta nani samlu koto kuwa ra. Tiyo semje sammo tamje, sosu pada mada nye da nye du ma juba, kiawa nga ma namsu. Ma juba me di pen tore, di pen me tore se, kiawa nga chi, nga me titu te sosu titu tsi kuwa ra. Chima yonga de sosu titu tsi kuwa ra. O ti titu za ane ko, chakda me semje kanga ka samlu toko, semje tamje. 동네에 들어와서 동거시 고도 삼사게 삼로제 기부 준비 삼로 고도 인데 뒤에도 심지어 탐지에 때문에 두통게 견군세 연대 군대기 산지지 고관 토바차기 삼자 미유 타르 무시비샤 예버도 타체 소소 삼로문에 타체라 근데 지금 대체도 당에 단단에 가르송도 산je 가르송도라 실 태바체 삼로다 강안년이 단단한 것주 통계도 것주 마음바나 제토에도 방생에 예버도 두기인 삼 뒤던달리 추년기 삼사 삼라타나 아니 추년에 뺏게 올랍 전부 두라 팀에도 다테 토스 대고 삼니 가르시든 지시그리삼 두스테샤나 그렇게 올랍 전부 주고 말아 이렇게 올랍 전부 주어도 소소 삼라타서 켜고 뒤에 그 야부지 세담데 셈바시오시 되지라
So here again, as Shantideva says, right now, this life that we have is like this great vessel by which we are able to cross this ocean of suffering. And so here, really on the basis of this body, this life, we are able to abandon the 10 non-virtues and engage in their opposites in order to ensure that we have a good rebirth as a human or a god in the future. This is something that we can do. We are able to do. We are able to abandon killing and do the opposite of protecting life, abandon stealing and do the opposite of being generous, and so forth. And this is something that we have the capacity to do, but really is about actually doing it. When we go out in society, we speak and we interact with others, that is when we really need to practice. We need to take account of our actions. What are we saying? What are we doing? What is our mind thinking? Are we malicious? Are we having jealousy or covetousness? We need to have a kind of accounting of that. If we think like, oh, I know the Dharma, and just walk around like that, we don't actually end up practicing. If we don't actually take account of what we are doing with our body, speech, and mind, then there's no way that we can begin to transform that and actually improve that. And so in addition, taking the time to purify, confess, and purify those negative actions that we have accumulated in the past, if we do this, if we're paying attention to the actions that we are doing now, and we engage in the process of confession, then through that we can purify those non-virtues that we have done in the past. It is possible through that kind of practice. And when we really engage in this, it's definite that we will gain a good rebirth as a human or a god. This is something that we can be assured of. But even if we are to get a rebirth as a human or a god, we all know the kinds of sufferings that we still experience, recognizing that even such a rebirth is not beyond the nature of suffering. We have to experience birth, aging, sickness, and death. We have to experience encountering what we don't want to, not getting what we want, and so forth. We all can recognize that. And so when we see that even such a good rebirth, although it's better than the lower realms, it's not beyond this nature of suffering, well then if we ask, well, what is the cause of this? What creates this kind of cycle of repeated rebirth in this suffering situation? Well, it's karma driven by our various afflictions. And really primary among those is the sense of an I, this kind of attachment that we have toward an I. And when we have a strong clinging to the I, we then think like, oh, well, my body, my possessions, my people, my race, my religion, and in turn have aversion toward who we see as other. And if we could get rid of that kind of clinging, that sort of bias towards this I, then we would get rid of the kind of aversion and hatred that we have toward others. So here, if we are able to eliminate particularly that sort of clinging to an I, right, and all the things that that I wants, I mean, we need to take care of our body. This is the basis upon which we can do the Dharma, but we can benefit it. We can do things like sustain ourselves without having such strong clinging, right? We need to have food. We need to have clothing. We need to have some level of wealth. But we see that some get so caught up in this, like they are accumulating so much wealth, thinking that somehow they can carry that with them, or somehow that they are going to be able to keep that. And that's not the nature of things. So if we are able to eliminate karma by eliminating the kind of afflictions that drive that, then we can be freed from this cycle of taking up aggregates and casting them off under the control of our karma and afflictions. And that then is the kind of second level of thinking. But when we reflect that it's not just us, we aren't the only one who is in this kind of situation, but rather if we look look around, all of the beings that we care about, our mothers, our father, our friends, our family, if we really begin to contemplate the kind of situation that we are in, it's unbearable. And when we extrapolate that to others, and we recognize that really others have been like our mothers, our fathers, our friends, our loved ones, and it's a matter of we just don't recognize it. I mean, we see the suffering that we have experienced in the past, the suffering or happiness of our past, as being our suffering or happiness, right? And so too, what we will experience again in the future in terms of happiness and suffering, we see as our happiness and suffering. And so when we think about it, all of those beings that, although we have changed lives, they have acted toward us with great kindness in the past and will do so again in the future. And so when we think about that, we wish to be able to benefit them and extract them from this situation of samsara as well. And so thinking, may I myself become a being, become a Buddha who has eliminated all faults and developed all good qualities. We set that as like a goal for the future, a long time for the future. And right now, although we might not be able to practice all of the kind of causes that will lead to that, we are listening to the Buddha Dharma in order to be able to strive for that goal, beginning with ensuring that we have a good rebirth in the future and continuing to strive toward that state of Buddhahood. If we have this kind of attitude wherein we really take as a foundation abandoning the 10 non-virtues, engaging in the 10 virtues, and purifying our negativities, then we can definitely get a good rebirth. And if we have set as our final kind of goal that state of Buddhahood, whatever virtue we engage in, like listening to the Dharma, becomes something that is really powerful based upon our thoughts. If we're just listening to this thinking like, oh, I'm going to learn something, or this might be beneficial for this life, that's much less powerful than if we have this kind of long-term vision of, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. And setting that as however far it might take to get there, I'm going to listen to the Dharma in order to be able to proceed toward that state, then this will become really powerful. So please set a good motivation for listening to the teachings.
Oh, yeah. Oh, 당한 주대 참지 될래 돼요 봐. Oh, 쇼로가 가데레. 납중합 된대 봐.
No.
Oh, 야, 납중합 돼. 다 단데 될 가르쳐도 쓰나. 이 넘버 쉐바데 랑신지 요레스로. 이봐, 네. 남시 랑신지 요레스. 여데테 유 수데티로레살라 소바 랑신지 투바 요레스. 디세요라. 디파 가스데레도. 넘버 쉐바데 랑신지 투바 치요레스 랑원네 투바. 가르데 유 수다 테로레살라 소바. 대주 강가 랑신지 투바도 와스. 디시에도. 여기 안에 내 가르쳐도 쓰나. 어. malo sentiment. Chita mingni tubaye, game kolo, zinji bangire, yuchibare, zinji bas. Tishin, wambu namgene, tade yuda, zimbarishese, rawa. Kasido sa chita mingni tubaye, mishidi, miwadi, liyako, chikot yako, game kolo sidi, 매럽지 제한테 타바견도 수요션에 고고 고견 통그라 뼈라지는 일에 숙십으시네 고고를 쓰는 것도 고고도 요 말하고 게메 콜로스기도 하til려 지다 미니 튜버에 게메 콜로 진지 바세 그 방진 교과 제산에 고고 통으로 마도 시 고고 요 말하고 지마도 요 말하고 요에 요 말하 디는 교다시는 미와되다 이 튜버 왕기 고고 진짜 통구요로 마도 전다 요 말에서 와라 전리 요 말에서 지다 미니 튜버에 게메 콜로 진지 바세 대신 원본 남견에 네 다들 유단 좀 봐줘. 다른 하시 대신 원본 남견 메게 원본을 차례 그 유수 자체로를 잘라서 뭐 어디다 줄여서 봐. 대주세요 알아. 대신 원본 남견 유수 미와 나와 지와 리와 이와 또 줄여 차례 그 유수 자체로를 잘 줄여서 봐. 어떻게 온 거 알아? 아니 대신 원본 남견 원본남기네 대대 유단 짐바치 원본라치 차르 엔텔레테네네 시바가 진짜 짐바치 요아레 시거라 디코 삼분하시 삼마 나주나시 삼마 예뱅게바 요 말에서 나에들 고 라문에 두번 남기 유나야 로이 소우타티 로레절라 소바 유이동하다 메모라 소바인데 코랑 유 코랑 뭐네 라완도 요버리 통교라 어디 단단하죠 차단께서 유조데 당진디 시고라 쇼탐제 랑기 당니 랑기 뭐요 바투어지 봐 티바 매버수고라 티 매버스는 착배 유디 매버샤고라 착배 유디 매나네 당에 유디 소소용을 매버샤고라 어디인데 차단 경우는 레사버데 매르 차단고 레사버 매나네 고고마로 어디시요 다시 좀버시 지다 미니 튜바에 게메콜로 짐버지바 대신시라 원부 남기니 다대 유다 짐버시바 인게세 원부다 유다 넘버시바랑 신기 주와 메데세 유에랑 신기 주와 요마레 유제랑 신기 주와 요마레세 다당마된 되데 남시랑 신기 주와 유데 유 수지 미시랑 신기 주와 유데 수디랑 신기 비치세라 고요라 어디 유대랑 신기 요마레 유제 코라랑 신기 요마레세 와라 랑신기 요스마랑 전에 코랑 코라 랑신기 현다라 직 떠는 데는마도 그거 매버진데 많이 봐 코랑 어디 랑신기 수여버리 삼고요라 랑은에서도 랑은에 랑신기세 그 코랑 은에 나라주 삼부터는 고대하잖아 근데 소소 삼부터는 나랑 예성도 딩에 소부는 딩에 류리 뛰지사 그냥 가다가 나랑 찍로서야 예배 삼고도 소보다 소화다 셈다 대줄에 땡진 되네 나한테 샤고베 나의 모습고베 삼을 고우면도 고라랑 신기해봐지 어디를 랑 신기해봐 랑은에여봐 랑게 뭐여봐 자 나중 나오는 시 수수 통하는 시 템버려봐 템버려봐 나라도 통하는 시 템버려고 제제네 지 유대버지 근데 삼을 고우다 어떨 때는 신자다 공도다 강가지기 와라. 이 매버서야 ತಂ달야 유고라 삼루 땅사가 유고란데 남중간주 삼루 땅나시 말해서 와라. 로 단대신에 가서 막아서 있네 꼭 유고랑문에 메가르지 통기 와라. 랑신기 수수심기 봐 딱이 오대 삼루 고기 오마라. 근데 밑에 편에 레벨이네 그 당고 뭐 마시네 계산 말고 랑신기 이름 뭐하지네 그 편에 통하다가 공도 사고 그랬대 사고도 와. 수레 삼도 보레도 가슴도 다그 가르 지지셔서 신의 공도 사고도 섬기 바 따는 것도 공도 사로 지문도 그 랑은에 이도 모아지네 그 섬기 삼로 하고 그렇지 그 통화 삼비 공도 사야다 신샤게다 되요 그랬대 요 말아 이 매버도 수수 섬기 바 따고도 이도 와다 매워다 야고 싶지도 사 두자 싶지도 사 소성기 밤마다나 유코랑 은에 연하니 섬지 상로마다나 그 통잠비 다가라 여고라티 용교 말아 어디에 실업님 비급신구도 최탐자랑 신께 돈바 남바 양다 버셔서 따오스 아니 소메 담메 팀메시도 섬메 메세데 당부 메세상 고대 가르도 따고라 티마데베제네 소메 담메 따 수요 말에 소메 담메 선도 산제데 선도 와서는 마디라 여고 가서다 최탐자 랑신기 돈바 남바 양다 버셔서 아니 소메 담메 팀메 로메르 점에시도 실제기 더 tian jikden ki tanya ki wangi yingi se tuan tamba ne mayi no sa dakshi mambu chi koran mayi ke dakshi mambu chi tela tena jikden ki di chi chi ridan di mama di kamba ridan di mota ridan di kambuta ridan se myuri ridan sha ra di wangi sha ku rima to chi koran yu koran myu ne ngalan di se kusi ming di se kusi yo ma ra di nga zu 그나 매드지 사시석 버리시로 들려 담부 왜 민드지 메스다셔라 매마다 이제 추슬라샤이나 담부데 다저 추스라 티게 요마라 매들이 추슬라샤 다저 추통세기데 매트셔데 그 단예데 가르자네 되게서라 민당부 단계데 고란 가르삼나 똑벌 가르삼나 직다셔라 현대다 가가 문제 제했던다 따고요 생겨 말아 어디 탄예지 왕게 샤고서라 지겐지 당연히 원그 차과. 그런 벽에 여버도 닥시점 가셔시 안 때려봐. 민지 따셔라. 그래서 초보라 땡진 늘네. 아니 그 당연히 때 닥실라 땡진 늘네 아니 뭐부터 샤고도 와. 마다 유코랑 문에 지게 랑문에 랑신지 랑게 뭐요 좀나. 가두이네로 따다는 마드베 코랑 문에 가두이네 진짜 삼고 코토가시고 야라. 디 셰가리아 티소나 엔디게.
So here, then picking up in the text, we're going to be picking up with verse 357. And so here, this is refuting the inherent existence of various objects, as well as the kind of faculties and the consciousnesses that perceive those objects. So here it says the sense faculty, the eye erroneously apprehends the circle formed by a torch being whirled around. Likewise, the sense faculties apprehend objects as if they were in the present. So here, when we have for example, a firebrand or some sort of torch that is being whirled around, or if you had a stick of incense, something that was burning, and you're moving it quickly around, it appears as though there is like a circle of fire or a circle of light. And so here, one can recognize that the eye faculty, something appears to the eye faculty. It appears as though it's existent in this way, but it doesn't actually exist as it appears. So in the same way that like our eye, the eye consciousness is deceived with respect to there being a kind of fire that is being whirled around. So too, when it comes to the kind of sense powers, they apprehend their objects, really the consciousnesses apprehend their objects as if they were really existent, like existent from their own side, when they don't in fact exist in that way. In the same way that likewise the sense faculties apprehend objects as if they were in the present, right? When we think about like a stick of incense or a firebrand being whirled around, it's not as though that actually is a perceiving the present object, but it's a series of moments that is being mistakenly apprehended as like a circle. And so too, when an object appears to our sense faculty, it appears as though it's existent from its own side, as if it has this kind of like objective existence in and of itself that's not dependent or contingent upon anything else. So when we think about like the objects that we see as pleasurable or the objects towards which we feel aversion, it seems as though they exist as that in and of themselves from their own side. But when we come to realize that actually they don't exist in that way, we stop creating the kind of karma with relation to the afflictions that arise towards those things that we find pleasurable or that we have aversion toward. So both the objects of our sense faculties and consciousnesses, as well as the subject, lack any sort of inherent existence. And so here, when we talk about inherently existent, that is something existing like from its own side, objectively, without depending upon anything else. Like we have this sense of there being an I or a self, right? That is somehow like existent in and of its own right. We think like, well, I'm really here. I don't depend upon other things. And then I have my body and my form and my feelings and so forth. But really, when we talk about something having that kind of inherent existence or objective existence, we could call this true existence or ultimate existence. This is the way that it appears to our various faculties, but when we actually examine, we can see that it doesn't exist in that way. By eliminating that kind of perception or that grasping at things as having that kind of true or inherent existence, we then are able to eliminate the kind of afflictions that arise based upon that, as well as the karma that then we create in driven by those. those. And so this is the reason why we are looking into the way that phenomena actually exist. Like if we have someone that we find unpleasant, that is our enemy, say, we think that they exist from their own side as our enemy, right? And if it were really the case that that person were unpleasant from their own side, objectively, truly, without depending upon anything else, then even before we sort of met them or knew them, we should have that kind of sense arise. Just by seeing them, we should feel like this kind of aversion, right? But someone isn't our enemy until they have done something, until our sort of thinking gets involved and we designate, oh, that person is my enemy. I don't like them. It's not as though upon first seeing someone without even knowing them, we give rise to that kind of hatred or aversion. It isn't the case that without thinking, we are able to really have that kind of feeling. If they were inherently unpleasant, inherently or truly existent as such, then just upon seeing them, we should give rise to that kind of aversion toward them. But that's not the case. We know this from experience. And so here, when we see that, as it says, like in the Heart Sutra, that we should see perfectly that even the five aggregates are empty of inherent existence. And then it goes into there's no form, no sound, no taste, no touch. It's not that they don't exist at all, but they don't exist inherently. And so too, in other of the Perfection of Wisdom sutras, it talks about how all phenomena are existent by convention, not ultimately, not intrinsically, not in their own right. And so, for example, we say that fire is that which has the characteristic of being hot and burning, but really that is just a name, a label that has been designated upon a collection of various parts that are not that thing. If we were to choose a different name, like from the beginning, we could call that thing which is hot and burning, we could call it water, right? It's just merely a label that we have designated. When it comes to all phenomena, they are merely designated by convention, as in we give a label or a name to a collection of parts, a basis of designation that is not that thing itself. So we can talk about there being a house or a computer or a person or this or that, but it's not as though they exist in and of themselves inherently without the process of our designating them through the means of conventions. And so here, when we are getting into this verse, talking about the way in which both the objects of our sense faculties as well as the sense faculties are not inherently existent, it is in this way that we should come to understand it, and as well as understanding the purpose for realizing this.
Oh, yeah. That's some bala, some said it. Wamburan Shinji Truba Kawashikdo, Tamatin, Wamburan Shinji Truba Kawatella, Tansen Sumkuna Kagdwa. Then Juaran Shinji Truba, Juaran Shinji Truba Kakbe, Wande Ranshinji Truba Kawashira, Juakura Ranshinji Tukumare, Tesonzani, Miwanda, and a Sula Soba Tezukanga, Wambusi de Miwana, what you want to see that. Then said it, the Sutra Racial Sociara. Wambuda Tende Ranshi Tuba Yongmares or Juankura Ranshi Mana, Wambuda Tende Ranshi Tuba Yongmares, Tambutche. Ne Juan Ranshi Tuba Kakwase, Juan Ranshi Tuba Yongmares, Nibachera. Tene Su Ranshi Tuba, Su Ranshi Matuba, Tesonza Su Ranshi Tuba Mares, Tensum Duata, Tambudera, Wandu Ranshi Tuba Yudesta, Mabu Ranshi Yuba Kelling get to the Kusenko Yara. Wombo da tense, Miwana Chamata, Suda to Reshala Sofa. Wombo da, Wombo you, Suda to Reshala Sofa, to the Ranshingi or the Sora. Wondu Ranshingi, Yude, they Junjua Yubichers, Juan Ranshingi Yubichers. Wombo da ten to Kanga, Suda to Reshasana, Echo Tire Deora, Tutu Tuba de Deora, or Tindi Miwana Chamata, Tutu Tuba de Deora, or to Wombo da ten, Wombo da ten of the Ranshinji to by Yude, Te Ju Juan Yubish, Te Ju, Sachu Melungu Juan Letene Tugura, Sachu Melunga Soba, to Juan, Suchuan and Juan to the Chawachen and to Tokuyara, Wombo da ten da, Teso. Chu Kusen Kugdua. Tadelepa Tichida. Wombo Nam da ten, Nam Sida. wangbo namda, wangdo namse, zhungwa namje rangshin deus, tezo zhungwa la tene, zhungwa rangshin riba asa wara, sayi zhungwa, meyi zhungwa, lungi zhungwa sera, zhungwa shi sera, zhungwa nga sera, tende yato, tongsa, tongdikri. Ane kabandu sa, zhungwa namje rangshin deus, zhungwa sosor teme mebe se, zhungwa sayi zhungwa, meyi zhungwa, lungi zhungwa la soba, soso rangshin chube teme mere se, teme mebe, teta tendo, teme me to se, tandi mo shi lo shantimina. Wangbo, wangdung di da tendo rangshin ki chuba me de se, wangbo da tendo sura. Wangbo nam da, ane wangdung nam, zhungwa nam jin debi rangshin to, de na se, kon zhungwa debu rwa se, kyu zhungwa koran de rangshin chuba marwa se wara. Zhungwa rangshin ki, zhungwa rangshin ki deba da se, zhungwa deba te rangshin ki chuba yaw ma re, zhungwa soso asina te rangshin ki chuba yaw ma re se. Te mene tezo tsokwa la teni chunga drebu, ane wangbo da tendo zo rangshin ki chuba yaw ma re se, te shekwa. O te shikyo ne ya.
So then next, in verse 358, we turn to a refutation of inherently existent senses or sense faculties. And this comes in 3 points, refuting inherently existent senses and their objects through refuting inherently existent elements. And then there's the actual refutation of inherently existent elements. And then finally, therefore, form is not inherently existent. So beginning with then through refuting inherently existent elements, refuting the inherent existence of the sense faculties and their objects. So again, our sense faculties like our eye sense power and ear and nose and tongue and body, as well as the various objects, the kind of forms and sounds, smells, tastes, and touch. So here, someone who would assert that phenomena are, that these are sort of inherently established because the elements that compose them or that lead to them are the cause of the various sense faculties and their objects are inherently established, sort of atomically established. So they would say that earth, water, fire, wind, and we could add space. So either 4 or 5 elements, that those are inherently existent. And so therefore, the kind of senses as well as their objects are inherently existent. So the first half of the verse where it says, the sense faculties and the sense objects are thought to be composed of the 5 elements, or sort of those who would assert that they are inherently existent because they assert that the elements upon which they are based are inherently existent. But since each of the elements is unreal, as is not inherently existent each individually, or the composite of those is not inherently existent, so they are ultimately unreal. So it is the case that the sense faculties and their objects are the results of the various elements, but the elements themselves are not inherently existent, either as a composite or individually inherently existent. And so therefore, that which results from them then is as well not inherently existent.
Oh, yeah. Niban zhungwa rangshin ki chuba kawa tera. Niban niye se towa. Tawa kare sa zhung nam susur ta de na se. Ane pishin mebe me ta jo. Zhungwa tuzu so susur rangshin ki chubu yo na. Ane pishin me na ya ko me de chub chogu de se wara. Zhung nam susur ta de na se. Zhungwa nam se. Zhungwa su te to se me rang se lamne diga me rida. Me zhungwa se wara kone se na. Me zhungwa da mel to se kya yo chirida. Me zhungwa se, sayi zhungwa se ra. Yunga zhungwa te. Ya. Tene zhung nam so so ta de na. Zhungwa sayi zhungwa, me zhungwa, lunga zhungwa te su kanga te so so rangshin ki trube ta de tu yo na se wara. Ane pishin me bar me ta kyo se. Pishin me na ya ane me yo chogre se wara. Pishin me na me trub tu yo mar do. Pishin sede de tsamal sigi samar, jidan jiden tanya lada pajo shin kambu ina pishin se chora. Me par shayora. Shin do kyaga do ina kunga ina shin do de chenpu de me paji shashayora. Ti Koran de me nyamdo sal shin da me ngo chebar jide de ora. Shin Koran malha me sate ene ti chi shin de me na me Koran te gmara tsosara. Udi pishin se tel se yusare samdwa. Til kogu kire. Tak wale sa. Junam susu tadena pishin meba mer ta juruse. Ya. Jidan pishin sede kupa jo shin kambu sha shabale pishin de sede segira. Tanda de me ta kuni ngochi kasore. Kaga shigime chidi chide mene chidi yomi tore me de baga denge chimire shine tongre re chiwara. Tongre de yogore mada tongre de mene me ite yomaro. Tiko chikuda tinese. Ya. Junam susu tadena pishin meba mer tal juruse. Duna chanyi me jurde lamalaya tetar ngese. Junam susu teme do tadeba yonase. Junam to ganga chichile te me kubeche susu rangshin di tadedu susu su yodansi gora. Ane pishin mena mede koran susu tadeche rawandu yochogura asegora. Pishin mebe mer tawar. Jula ase. Dune sosu senyi rangshingi mebar yurde se. Duba chena ya sosu senyi rangshingi mede. Rwa. Dube chir, penchu chichil dugi wara. Dujin reni ya tuku yor mato che ko chir. Dame du rawangi su rangshingi tuya shi o mara. Chunga lama namla tedar nge so se. Tanda ko chunga duzu ina kari ina ngobu kanga chebarwa. Rangshingi yo mara. Kari yorsa chema cheni wara. Rangshingi yo sidi koran shenta ala chik toshin teme kore chi kogda. Koran rangshingi yo mara, chema cheni ware. Pige koran mingta asatile mahingi kashe chi kore, ene tanyi faa chi taane, te tsamli shaa koe chirwa. Wadi shikuna, dikire.
So then next, we have a refutation of the inherently existent elements. And so here, this comes then in 359. And so it says, if the elements were distinct from each other, then fire could occur without fuel. But if they form a single composite, then they have no distinct defining characteristic. And this analysis applies to the remaining four elements. So here, when we talk about now there is actually a case that the fire and the fire element are slightly different. But here, when it comes to the element of fire, it's not as though we can posit a fire that exists in and of itself independently from something that it is burning, right? So when we talk about each of them having some kind of individual inherent existence that is totally inherently different from all of the others, we can't actually posit that. Like, for example, in India, they'll take dry dry wood and burn that, and we can't posit some kind of fire that exists independently of what it is burning. We can't have the element of fire without the thing that it is actually consuming. And so here, it is not the case that each exists individually in a way that it is inherently existent, but they are contingent, dependent upon one another. So the elements, the various elements, don't have this kind of inherent distinctness from each other. If that were the case, then fire could occur without fuel. So that's the first half of the verse. And then where it says, but if they form a single composite, then they have no distinct defining characteristics. So although they are contingently designated, it's not as though we can say that the sort of aggregation of them, if they're a single composite, then we wouldn't be able to posit them as having individual different characteristics. So they're not either inherently established as distinct entities that are completely and totally distinct, nor as a kind of single composite that is inherently existent, because they are contingently established, dependently established. So here, this isn't just applicable to the various elements, but all things are the same, that they are sort of fabricated, that they are something that is designated in dependence upon something else. We give a name to a collection of parts that is not that thing and say, well, this is that, but they don't exist in and of themselves in their own right. And so as one has reasoned into the element of fire, so too it is definite, it is the same for the other for the remaining elements.
Oh, yeah. Sumbasira. Then a sura shiki matuba shatera, sumbat. Then a sura shiki matuba shatwa. Tits our caressana, Tedaran Junam. Namnisuma sera. Jun Sosutan, Dubatla Sobas to the Rashiki Meba Shetasa. Deme Pena, Dutu Mese. Then Sosu the man and it's on Dubaton de Rashiki Ungumara. Rewate Rashiki Mana, Sosun Dute Rashiki Ungumara. Duba Deme Niji Chess, soon Duba de Jun Soso Rashiki Me, Jun Sun Dunichi Sobate Rashiki Mana. And tell it any suta te road a jealous over to it to the Russian young Maresura. Suja turned to term it ose, or today. You got to those enough. Kedan Joanam Sosotan Duba, Nison Russian Jimmys, the Talshesara, Soso Russian Jomar and Duba Russian Jomarese. They may be an Joan Soso than Duba Russian Jimena, and then Duba Niji Russian Matube term it ose. Duba Niji Ranshiji Trubeton matter, and Dube Latene Chunga Su Tate Rojalas or what is Ranshiji Trubeteleka Young Maresora. And Duba Demeba Niji Suga Ranshiji True Juan Sosun Duba de Soso Ranshiji Duba Ranshiji Mana. And then Duba Demeba Niji Suga Tondo Ranshiji Trubeton Meto, Su Ranshiji Trubamede. Te gyun chunga soso watan dewa te rangshinki mebe shirsiga. Meto se. Te meba luji, abatina. Ya. Te meto so de te tatar, te dusa. Meto ya te shikuna. Niba wane yungi siro. Niba te ya hote shikuna. Meto wasi te che.
No. So then next is therefore forms are also not inherently existent. So this is in 360 wherein it reads, in both these ways the elements are unreal, either as inherently distinct individuals or a kind of composite, an inherently existent composite. So a composite formed from them, something that arises from the elements such as form, is also unreal. And since the composite is unreal, form is also ultimately unreal. So here, when it comes to, again, it is the case that the individual elements are not inherently existent. They don't have this kind of inherent existence either as sort of distinct individuals, nor a kind of composite that's already been refuted above, right? And so then the composite, or that which arises from them, for example, form and the rest of the sort of sense objects, is therefore not inherently established, is ultimately inherently unreal as well. And so again, here, this is based upon the fact that the cause of these, the forms and so forth, is not inherently established. Again, the individual elements are not established inherently, nor is there a composite of them that is inherently established. And so I think we'll stop before the last line of the commentary, but it says that then there is no sort of cause of bodily pleasure and so forth. The things like that, like form that create, that we take as being the cause of our pleasure, then are not inherently existent.
그래서 다들 니바니 세대로 다 종아 소소 타되는 비심에베 메타죠. 딘데서
나래.
딘데서 데르베
di drosason. Nipa di dewa senipe ngogo gakpa dirwa.
아야 니바 세르죠. 오메 티 돌아도시. 야 니바 세 니바 대화랑 세게 데르와 니바 대화랑 세베 뭐 가봐세. 다 사제 초 대화 동해세데 랑셈바 랑센스데 데 랑가 천이 두바 가셔들으시고 말하다. 원에 전에 롬바사마도 원에게 롬바사마도 배 대왕원에 쉽게 메두시에 된다라 랑셈바세데. 원에게 말으세르시래. 니바 대화랑 셈베 뭐 가봐네. 소라 남시단 두시단 두지 다 렌직도 중에 랑신게 여도 신에서 뭐마와서라 랑신게 요바 켈랭게 속에 라 가르식도세나 먼저 파카에 때와랑 제바가 위어라 뒤에서 렌장게 되 뭐라 랑신도 마와서라 소라다 남시다 두시다 두지게 풍불어서 버텨서 렌직도 중에 랑신게 여도 신나서 그저 참마데 렌지도 좀 냠도설 요청을 해서라 소라다 두시다 소라다 남신 두시기 풍부해서 봐 그래서 렌지도 줘봐 랑신기 요도시네 렌지도 줘봐 랑신기 줘봐 요도세 세나세요라 뭐뭐 랑신기도 요래서 다들 봐 가고시네 남시 소르단 두시다세 남바시베서 소아세 두시세데 조지 본부 소야 본부 두시 본부 두시 본부래 셴베 본부들은 두시 본부시바 두시 본부실레센스 남자 탐제도 소소 당이 되면서 담배던도 되면서 소소 아메베시나 네 담발이야도 참아요 말해서리시로 대외 소라 담배던도 랑신지 주베 되면도세 소아 대화세도 담발라 랑신지 주베시요 말해서 남시기 풍부다세 소라다 두시다 두시기 풍부 남자 풍부 현다도자 로 담제가 탐제 두시 남자 탐제도 되바랑시기 마주치 소초바데 랑시기 두고 말해 소소와야 당니지 두베 때메데 저 소소와스네 랑시 두고 말해 소소와 랑시 두면은 저 뒤뒤 냠도 소소나 뒤바데 랑시 두고 teleke 말아 메베치로사 야 어디시구나
So then next is in verse 361. And so we get to a refutation of the sort of entity of real pleasure. And so here, where it's saying real pleasure, this is not the kind of existence by means of its own characteristics, as in when we apply that to the object of negation, but pleasure, like as in sort of real within the world pleasure. And so here it says then, again, those that are sort of realists who would assert that the various aggregates and so forth are inherently existent, they say, well, feeling and consciousness, discrimination, compositional factors, as they arise together, they are then inherently existent. And so here it says consciousness, feeling, discrimination, and volitional factors individually in no way have ultimate essence. Therefore, they are ultimately unreal. So again, it's when we have established that form, which was what was refuted above, is not inherently existent, and so too, then when it comes to the other sort of five of the five aggregates, the other four of the five aggregates, our consciousness, feeling, discrimination, and volitional factors, those kinds of volitional factors being those which don't fit into the other of the four aggregates, they don't have any kind of individual inherent existence, right? So our sort of feelings of pleasure is not something that is inherently existent, nor is the aggregate of consciousness, feeling, discrimination, and volitional factors. It's not as though the kind of aggregation, the coming together of those could be something that is inherently existent. They're not individually inherently existent or sort of ultimately real in their own right. And so too, it is not the case that then the aggregation of those is something that is established inherently in and of itself or in its own right.
Oh, that is. Taniba Tungeran Shinki Truba Kawani Sido. Oh, Tabara. Sibe Yu Sido. Sibe Yu. Digido. Sibe Yu Ranchenba. Sibe Yu. Dewa Ranchenba. Ngoda. Tujita Cheba Kanes. Right. Sibe Yu Sejiro Pesi. Sibe Yu Sido. Sibe Yu Dewa Ranchenba. Ngoda. Tujita Cheba Kanes. Kacharin Sura Talia. Kane. Ani. Delwe. Teware. Sibe. Tungeran Shinki Truba. Goba Yenose. Oibere. ane teba sibe yu tewa ran senjiru tunge ma chon du san tewe ndu shike gora o te tebu tewa de rangi senjiru ba yo mare se ti yebe kyusen de cho pa ka sare yin se mare je ba ka ne ane tewa sibe yu tunge ran senjiru ba ga ba yenos ya बहुत इसके ना देखो
So then, second is a refutation of inherently existing pain. And so this comes in 362, wherein it says that, again, having already refuted the kind of idea that the coming together of sort of an object of our senses and or an object and our senses, that the meeting of that could establish some kind of real pleasure, and then that the absence of that would mean that there is some sort of an inherently existent pain. This too is being refuted here in the verse, wherein it says that what one presumes is pleasure is actually a reduction in pain, right? So when we think about what is designated as pleasurable is just really a reduction in pain. And likewise, the suppression of pleasure is what one presumes to be pain, or sort of inflated, or we sort of place upon that this idea of that being pain. But again, that pain is not inherently existent in the same way that our pleasure is not inherently existent. These are phenomena that are merely contingent or dependent upon one another.
oh yeah that is ta chidara tunge chirchu lase tunge to so nyuru chi makeup tele asura ane tewen du shi chi yo re chera koe sakche chi so te wat so mang cha te ra chidara tunge chirchu la tendo te war nga je che se 동해대 또서 총으로 친소나 아니 대외가 제치 그래서 다들 야부총 소섬 대화를 넘겨 땅가 제치스나들 넘겨라 그러나 봐 야부총 소섬 동해대 총으로 친버들야 그래서 아주 빼지 않다래 줘서 붕배간 또 들으시기에는 붕배 예배간 마부 나서나 디저데 저께서나 또서 야부 세세 대회도 시기 어다 야부총 섬사 드시리 시기라 그리고 니나 강에 여버든 요리체자 대변도 시기라마도 디나니아 고추사로 어디나 시시거라 동해대 총으로 갑질을 대변도 시기도 세라 대화도만 요로 줘서는 동해도 시기도 세 동해랑 셈바시다 대화랑 셈바시가 말해서로 코아바 대화 동해셔야 돼 지대로 동해 칠줄라 전도 대화랑 아제시 야롬바 삼대사라 대신 된좀 교르발라 대화 봐 전부도 봐 요로 친소나 소소 셈나를 대화 소리에 대화도 봐봐 요로 친소나 다 동해기 소리기 그래서 와라 동해도 양아제시에서 동해도 넘겨와래서 대마도 그 랑셈바지 대화 랑셈바지다 대외 주디 다 내리를 줘야 코아바게 대외 주디 다가 되나 대화도 다가 되면 두서래 동해도 두어래 동해도 양 동해도 주디 다가 돼서는 동해도 동해라지는 대기도 오세가라 지켜봐시다 직지든 나오리도 고래시 나기는 고 나서 짜짜봐도 동해 대기라 고 나니야 tra서나 대변도 시기라 대긴 나서 숙심부터 또 소리체서나 대변도 시기라 대대 교인이야 따가로 대오를 대대 말로 또 제서는 대외 소용 말로 대 주디 대긴 고 나기 요 말에 주디 다가 대어라 뭐야 지다르 동해 질주기 소화 동해 중세 숙총에 내가 불라 전도 대에서 전달이야 랑센베 대화를 같이 집어 대신도세 대화 좀 생문지를 중세자 매바라 줄발라 랑신기 주베 동해 동양 같이 집어 세제 랑신기 주베 동해 중세자 매대 대세 삼도 세베시로 직질을 뜨네 삼로 땅다다 텐데 와게 코치 용되도 아마도 랑신기 주베 뜻이 민도 아세요라 야 뜻이구나
So here, sticking with verse 362, when we have sort of fixed or alleviated our suffering to a certain degree, then we think of that as being pleasure, right? We sort of inflate that as being, or we presume, one could say, that that is pleasure. So this is really how we experience contaminated worldly pleasures, that we have a sense of, oh yeah, this is really pleasurable, but when it is in actuality just a kind of reduction temporarily in pain, in suffering that we are experiencing. And so we've given examples before, like if you're carrying something for a really long time on your right shoulder or your left shoulder, whichever it may be, and you switch it to the other one, it feels like, oh yeah, that's relief, that's pleasurable. But it isn't actually a kind of real pleasure. It's just a reduction in the pain, in the suffering that we are feeling. And so too, when we experience some kind of reduction in our pleasure, then we designate that as being painful, right? But there isn't any inherently existent pain. Now, there is something, a slight difference in that when we rely upon certain causes, again, that reduce our suffering temporarily, we think of that as being pleasurable. But it isn't as though the more that we sort of indulge in that particular cause, it's going to always be pleasurable. Eventually, it will turn to suffering. Whereas when it's something that is suffering, like when we have a headache, it's not as at a certain point of having that headache, it will become pleasurable in the same way that that it is for pleasure. But rather, it is the case that as long as we have that headache, we're suffering, right? But if we rely upon something that we think is a cause of pleasure and continue to rely upon that, it won't continue to be pleasure. And so here there's that difference, but there is the similarity that neither of these are inherently established. We only are able to posit pleasure as in a reduction of pain, and so too pain as a reduction of pleasure. That these are not these are not phenomena that are inherently established in the slightest, but rather are merely contingent phenomena. They are contingently established upon one another.
Oh yeah. That's sumba kakbende tate rangwene truba rangshinji truba kaswa yu dang wangbu dang tetu. Oh. Tate drebu tila nyi si tishe toa. Drebu kakbende drebu tila nyi. Tungni tokba trelamdo tenpa. Tongpa nyi tokba loti. Ane koe tungele tre lam re se kora. Trelam se tira. Koe tsawa de rangwene truba rangshinji truba. Tā rāngshīn jī chūpa, tā tu jī bāsi wīrā, tā rāngshīn jī chūpa, tā kīwā rāngshīn jī chūpa sērā. Tā tā chū kāngā rāngshīn jī chūpa tī kuwa tsā chī wā rā, tī nā nē tā tī tāngzīn tī tsō chī wā rā. Tī ndī kō kā sū rā. Tūngi tōpa lō tī chūwa rī tēmpā sī, chūwa lām, kuwa lē chū chī kī lām, yā tūngi lē chū chī kī lām, nyamū lē chū chī kī lām, rā. Koe chui so nyomu, chakdang la soba nyomu le choshikiram, kanka kare ne chibara. Soba la debu la nyi shayarwa, tongni tok pe chowar tenpa tans, tongni tok pala tene koe tongi le chondukure sti shayagara. Tongni tok pe yujen ji lo ngo so, tongni tok pe lo te yujen di kandachil shigare ti ngo song kutwa. Ta tambu tōngi tō suna ne kōla chō rūg rīs tī tēngi tō. Tōngi tō bē ane chōwa rī tēmpa wā sā. Tī tsōwa dī kār dō sā na. Tētā rō ngō nī mē chē rī sī jirā. Tētā rī ngī tātā rī sī bā ngī rī. Tētā rō ngō nī mē bē shī. Rāngu nē chū bē ngō nī mē bē shī. Yu dāng wāng bū tāng rō nām shī lā sō bā tē sā mā kāngā. Rāngwēne trūpe rāngi ngō yō mārē, ngō mē sē te. Jitāng kō ngō tsamte yōnggirā, rāngwēne trūpe ngō mē sē. Pētāra ngō nī mē chē rē sē. Tētāng tēpē sēpa tāng sē rā. Tētāng tēpē sēpa tāng. Tē wāla sōpa tētū tāng tēpē sēpa tāng. Tūngē tēpē sēpa pōng sē. Tūngē tā tēwāla sēpa nīgā yōnggirā. Tēwā yinē kō kāngē rī chīn chōng rī shīn sō nē, tēwā sō sō nē tēlā sēpa kīwā rā. Tūngē tā tēwā sē. Ngō nī mē kārī sē rī. Tētā rī ngō nī mē sē rāngshīn jī tūpē ngō mē bē sē na. Tētāng tēpē sēpa tāng sē. Tēwā kāngē chīn yōng rī chīn nē tē kāp lī āne tēwā sōm lōm kīwā rā. Tēlī āne sēpa de tēndu kua rē. Tētāng tēpē sēpa tāng sē. Tēwā tāng tēpā la sēpa yōngu rā. Tūngē tēpē sēpa pōng sē, tūngē kāngē rī chū nē, tī tō sū nyū rī chīn sū na, tā yā bū chūng sū sām yā tī yōngu rī tō. Tūngē tēpē sēpa pōng sē, tōng bō nī tō sū na tī sēpa tī pōng tū rī sē. Tī sē tētār tōng wā chō rī sē. Tēndē tōng sū na nē, nyō mū lē chō nē kō lē chō tū rī sē. Ngā rī sēpa tētār sīpa yu tāng sēpa ngō nī jī chūpa mē bā tē sē rī sē. Kōrā tāng tēne tē yu wāng bō tāng sū lā sō bā tāng tē tsū tāng mā rāngshīn jī chūpa mē bā sē rī sē. Ngā rī sēpa tētār sīpa yu tāng sēpa ngō nī jī chūpa mē bā sē rī. Rāngshīn jī tōng bē tāng rāngshīn jī tōng bē tāng kōmbar sēpa lē tsōwa tēwā tāng sēpa sēpa tāng, tsōwa tēwā la sēpa tō tū rī sē. Tūngē tāng tēwā tēyā kō tēwā tē tō chōng rī chīmba lī yā tūngē tāng tēwā mārī tēndē. Tēwā tāng sēpa tāng, tūngē tāng tēwā la sēpa, tūngē tāng tēwā la sēpa. Seba Pangbe, Seba Pangbe, Le Meso, or Seba Mena, Sebe Wangi Le Sagmarwa, Chakbe Wangi Kawata, Mikiwe Le Sagmarwa, Chakbe Wangi Kawata, Mikiwe Le Masana, and a call to Koe Kusagi Omara. Seba Pangbe, Le Meso, Mesoche, Koale Chor Jua Teacher, Tandakochi Rangshinji Tuba, Yito Wata Mewarba, Yito Wata Mewa Rangshinji Tuba, and Chatangi di Kigiwara, Chatangi di Kitita Chapa Yute Toyeta, Medebe Yute Toreto Daladi, Le Kosumki Lesa Yora, Teledeni Kwako Yora. Tumeda Treve Seba Ponla, Seba Pambe, Le Meso. Kwa kyo penchigi le sati ko le kanga marwa. Chakdangi wangi le sa suna pina tangi wangi te kiwe le to saya kiwa mar mikiwe le sa gara. Chakbe wangi kiwe le sa yore, mikiwe le sa yora. Susu le shencha wangi o tanga yabu chen mato ngachi ma maungpa na tungi nyunguri sambayi na. Sebe wangi rawa kiwe le sa yora, mikiwe chupang kiwa chutube yora. Ti chakbe wangi te sa yora, susu le shencha chesa. Ti chakdangi wangi nyamugi kune lani le sa suna ni kwa penchi kule duyara. Ti nyamu yonga de ko rangshin jituba jeba ti yosa, ni chakbe yu rangshin jituba ra. Kondu sasa yu rangshin jituba yosa, chakdangi samlu tiki yora. Wale so, seba da tumya le so pon. Seba pang bele meso je kwa le tuwan juwe chire. Tedar tenju tuwe ta. Tamche dan trewa tongwa le trewa rin gyuru ese. Tongpa nye je tan tokpa lan bewa se. Tanda tenzi dewa na zwa. Ngobo kante si ina di samli sha ura. Kuna cha she ka she shi yo ura. Cha me she chal me se re nangbe lu che na. Su chi roba me gira chi kanjen sab si yo mara. Ngobo ka she so na ma do ngobo kura ngobo tuwe yo mara. Cha dan che ba gogo yara. Cha kasheru chen, tile mingzi taani tokbe wangi tangyesi taani shaaguyara, ti mado yo mara. Ina nga razi ti samgi mara, yu korang ngune, rangshin ki yido wa ina yido wa chi chakbe yu. Yido wa ina tangye tachi ina ku meka sachi, yu rangune meka sachi. Susu semgi suwa di tenro chik mara. Susu semgi toza keche shedan drima dridan, lega chedan drima dri chigi, trata nye suwa ni shenja chigi yu di samgi mara. Yu korang ki chi wane chi che samsa tengira. O tisi yora. O kawa leksa sana. Tanda tisi yage ba. Chadang ku wangi le sa suna ne kowa pensi le re se. Chadang wangi le sa me na. Ne kowa kye yo mara. Kiwa thoma me ba ne sa shabe. Chadang wangi le ma bu yu ne. Kepsan tendur ta. Seba de pa na. Ne yu na ku meto kye ki. Suen de yu na ku chuchi me na kero chik marwa. Suen yu na ki ping mara sal sakambu na shasha ni ko chik marwa. Tina shi seba de me na. Keba seba da kuwa lemba si kora. Ti me na ane kyo lana yu mara. Seba de pang kuwa ra. O, ti so. Pang kuwa le so ta. Seba pang be le me so. Chin. Kuwa le chuan kiwa ti siri. Te dara. Tinchun trebe ta. Kedan trewe. Tongwe. Kedan trewa tongwe. Tongwa le trewa rinjuwe. Tongi ki ten tongpa le bebar shaos. O ta tongda ko. Trebe ta kedan ristu nga zu tawa shirab ta tindre kapsi yungi ba. Kanki tenshi trebar chiong kakwa meba, ke meba, sheba meba, ta meba, waa meba do. Tade di me te jime treba nishi se. O shi tenba se. Tisunga. Tenda tongpa ni yapu to sunani, ti tongpa le tene. Tangjin le soba tisa paani kuwa le tuyandu yora. Waa tishi chuna.
So then next, for beginning with verse 363, we have the kind of result of that refutation. And this then is taught in two parts, the liberation that occurs through realizing emptiness and then identifying the mind realizing emptiness. And so here, when we are talking about this kind of path to freedom, it's the path to freedom from our afflictions, the freedom from suffering, the freedom from samsara. And when we have this kind of grasping at the self as inherently existent, and then the mind as inherently existent, and so forth, we give rise to attachment and aversion, and in turn create karma that leads us to continue to take rebirth within samsara. And so here, by getting rid of that kind of grasping, that base, that the grasping at a self, it then eliminates all of the kind of suffering and afflictions that come from that, and the repeated rebirth within samsara. And so here, by coming to this kind of recognition, as it describes in this verse 363, that, as it says, since they are essenceless, one eliminates the craving to obtain pleasure and the craving to avoid pain. Thus, those who see thus attain liberation thereby. So we have this kind of, again, grasping at a phenomena, the objects of our senses, the senses themselves, as being inherently existent. But when we come to see that they are essenceless, that they are not inherently established, and really get rid of this kind of craving. We have a sort of a craving to meet with pleasure and a craving to be freed from suffering. And again, we are really sort of projecting or exaggerating onto a situation in which our pain is slightly reduced, and we hold that as being pleasure, right? And we want to meet with that. We crave to meet with that. And so too, when we experience some kind of reduction in our pleasure, we crave the being separated from that suffering that occurs as a result. And so here, in order to be freed from the kind of repeated cycle of rebirth, by getting rid of this kind of craving, by abandoning that craving, both for meeting with pleasure and for being freed from suffering, then one no longer accumulates karma, and in turn is thereby freed from samsara, freed from our afflictions, and thereby freed from samsara. And again, we sort of exaggerate or presume that when there is a reduction in our suffering, that that is pleasurable, and we cling to that as pleasure. And when we have a kind of situation in which our pleasure is reduced, we cling to that as being suffering, or really crave for that to be eliminated, for us to be separated from that. And if we don't have that kind of clinging, that grasping, and this is really the kind of eighth link within the 12 links of dependent origination, then we will no longer take rebirth within samsara. We're not continuing to accumulate the kind of causes for such a rebirth. And it's really from this kind of viewing certain objects as pleasurable, as the objects of our attachment, and others as the objects of our aversion, that we then engage in various karmas that propel us to take rebirth within samsara. Now, karma that propels rebirth within samsara, when we are motivated by aversion and hatred, then we only are going to accumulate non-virtuous actions that in turn lead to a lower rebirth, a bad rebirth. Whereas out of attachment to ourselves and wanting pleasure for ourselves, we engage in virtue that then acts as a karma that propels us into a kind of a positive rebirth, a better rebirth. But it is that holding to inherent existence that in turn leads us to accumulate karma. And so there is, again, this process by which we have something that has parts. parts, right? There is a whole that is based upon parts. There's nothing that exists sort of in solitude, free from any sort of parts. And independent upon that collection of parts, we designate with a particular label. Oh, this is this. And we see it as though there is something that exists from its own side, independent of our mentally labeling, like this whole that exists without depending upon the parts, and also something that is independent upon our labeling this. And so, again, we think like, oh, this person is bad or is my enemy from their own side. It has nothing to do with the way that I'm thinking about it, when really we think of people as being our friends or our enemies based upon whether they do things that accord with our mind and our way of thinking, or whether they do something that does not. And so it is through this kind of elimination of that grasping at a self, grasping at things as though they existed in and of their own right, that we are able to eliminate all of the kind of things that come out of that, our afflictions, and then the kind of karma that we create. And so it is by getting rid of this craving in particular that is the factor that acts to nurture or ripen those karmas that propel further rebirth, that we are able to end this sort of cycle. So here, as it explains in the commentary to this, that one becomes sort of seeing the kind of freedom from any sort of extremes. This is like it is said in Nagarjuna's homage, beginning the fundamental verses on wisdom, that says, to him who taught that things arise dependently, not coming, not ceasing, not arising, not annihilated, nor yet permanent, not coming, not departing, not different, not the same, the stilling of all thought and perfect peace, to him the best of teachers, the perfect Buddha, I bow down. So it is through that recognition of dependent origination that stills, that gets rid of all of our thoughts, in particular this kind of craving, that we are able to attain freedom. And it is to our profit, right, to be able to eliminate that kind of craving, because it is the fact that through the elimination of that craving, no matter how much karma we have accumulated in the past, that karma will become like seeds that aren't able to bring forth a sprout because they aren't actually planted. They don't have the conditions for that. So no matter how much karma we may have accumulated in the past, by eliminating our craving, we are then able to make that karma like seeds without water, and thereby eliminate any sort of further rebirth based upon that. And so therefore, one should make an effort to realize the meaning of emptiness.
Oh, yeah. No, that and that could tend to depiction, but you are not. Number Sanja Buchena, Judah Jen la tension debris joa. Taxida, Doxil la tension debris joas. Then did the Koya, Duce in the Koya, Jackson, Judah Jen la tension debris joa. Then the Kura to Truba Ranshin, Joachim Gomara. Oh, Tina Shining, Ragging all shadows, Chashet to la tension, no lofa tani Kungo to Shaku Yoda. Into Rangine to be Ranking Gomara. Ranking oil to be tangy to Gomara, Tameba, Rawadu to be tangy meba, Chokarine. Oh, Tindico, tended the package and Bociguara. Oh, then did the Tapacoche, Rawa. And then Jita Chepapola Sober Shenda, Takbe Jungoche. Takbe Ju condition at the young Maris, Pango Viora. Tuineco Metapachicorma, Tabaka Chuchi as your Maris. Jukoran Juachan and Jebul Juanduachico Viora. Yako Tambakache. Mendeba Sama Tawang Yaba Sama Goche, the Tendegi go to Yusigara. Oh, the Namsha Shaya Sama Metapada, Tungawata, Tongbani said to the Samadi, Tejan Debrich was so the Shato Guara. Tanashi Lam Comnia Kone on the Paya Yuba, Paja Meticho Paya Yubatiko, Tejan Debrich was so the Guara. Tejan Debrich was man around to Baranshi to Batabat Dennis, so you take Omara. So Eke Omara Koratagate Rematache. What in this Shitanichi Besumbanashi. Number Sanji Tumbasanji Chumdente. Tejan Debrich was a bear. Do you tam jem bedawa? Tejan Debrich was a bet shoot tam Jetoshi Dameba. Oh, it is a soon but is a teacher and it Tambalana Meva. Kashi sushi sungpa kenda tenpa lana mes. Tendi tokpe kempa de kempa lana meba. Ten jen drebari juwa sido rangwene drupe tongpa de nyamdo yungu wara. Te kempa lana meba rese wara. Te tengengi tenpa de tenpa lana meba yese. Sanje chumden de la tenpa lana meba se. Tenpa shenda chum sungi mambu yora. Tenpa yunaya tendi sungi omara. Te sungza te sungpa chane misege. Ni tenpa kebar chare yese. Nangpa te tendi dipe kechim shagora. Gombo ludu geta wana shisungudwa. Tenjen drebara juwa ka tene tongpa nyidu shese. Dakshila tenjen, tetan drene le pa taane chwe te ngo shago yora. Te sonza rangwa du chwe tongpa yo ma re se ora. Tenjen drebara juwa tene tongpa nyi. Taana me ribe se me mar da se ra. Tene tene takpa te teni ume la. Dakshita chashila tene le pa takpa tsamle ya. Yudi chawa chiba de shago re se. Te sonza chebe tali te ore se. Zawane mewa ma re se. Rangwane truba de meza, takbe tali te ore. Rangwane tangi truba de yo ma re se. Takshe tangi te tre u sungudwa. O te sonza tenre de peke shimbo yin se. Zawa shiribla soba te zoko tenpa sanje chumden de ngombulu du tuya de. Tenre sungba chana maha tuyo re se re. Te karo se tenre de peke shimbo sonza. Te chane tuya yi sungudwa. O te chila ma re.
So here, as it says in the commentary, then that it's really those who see thus attain liberation, and this really refers to seeing dependent origination that is free from all sort of extremes of elaboration. And so here, dependent origination is asserted to be incredibly important. You know, there's different levels of dependent origination. All compounded phenomena are arisen from causes and conditions. There's no inherent arising because of the fact that there is this dependency upon causes and conditions. And so too, there is a dependency in the sense of being dependent upon this mental labeling. And so too, when it comes to things, they are dependent upon their various parts, right? There is a kind of relationship between the whole and the parts that we can't posit. There's no sort of self-existent whole that exists in and of itself with its own essence because it is dependent upon various parts. And so here it is the case that this kind of assertion of dependent origination is able to eliminate the kind of wrong views of outsiders, particularly like the assertion of some kind of permanent cause or a creator. It is through dependent origination that those sorts of wrong views can be eliminated. How could there be a permanent cause? What kind of result could that produce? And so forth. And it is through dependent origination and the assertion of dependent origination that those sorts of wrong views are eliminated. And so too, it is the case that the kind of positive suppositions that the Buddha has made, like impermanence and emptiness and selflessness, can be established through dependent origination. And so it is the case that those kinds of truths are something that is positively established through an understanding of dependent origination. And so too, it is dependent origination and the fact of dependent origination that means that we can actually develop our mind in the sense of eliminating all faults and developing all good qualities. This is something that is possible because phenomena are dependently originated. And so here, this is, you know, we see this in the kind of praise of Jelama Tsongkhapa, praising the Buddha for his teaching of dependent origination as being like an unexcelled speaker because of the kind of assertions of phenomena as being dependently originated. And this really is, you know, based upon the teachings of Nagarjuna, in where he explains that whatever is dependently arisen, that has been explained as empty. And so here, whatever it is that is dependently arisen, we can't assert that it has some sort of essence in and of itself, that it is established objectively from its own side. But it's not that it's non-existent. In dependence upon something else, it is imputed as existent. So there is this level of dependent designation, and that is the middle way indeed. And so it is through the kind of, Nagarjuna himself in the root verses on the middle way repeatedly praises dependent origination, because again, this is something that is so centrally important in terms of coming to a proper understanding of emptiness that is free from the two extremes, in terms of eliminating the kind of wrong views of outsiders that make assertions that are to be refuted, and in terms of the kind of actual development of our own mind. The possibility of developing qualities and eliminating faults is based upon this understand that things are the reality of dependent origination. And so here, when we bring up this idea of dependent origination, it's something that is absolutely crucial in various ways.
Oh, yeah. Oh, good matter. Yeah. Oh, and that's also.
No.
Yeah.
So we are out of time for today, so we will have to leave it there.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Ginla. Thank you very much, Tujiche. And thank you, Katrina, for your beautiful translations today. We'll finish with some dedication prayers.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and those spiritual friends who practice it, have long life. May I pacify completely all our inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of wholesome's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Idam Guru Mandala Kamyatayami. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that form have no decline, but increase forevermore.